The mediator set down her pen and looked across the table at my daughter and her husband. "Mr. Calloway, is this your signature on the revised partnership agreement?" I looked at my daughter, Carol. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "It is not," I said. Carol's lawyer started to speak, but the mediator held up one hand. "I'm not asking you, counselor. I'm asking the parties directly." She turned back to Carol. "Mrs. Sutton, you submitted this document as evidence that your father voluntarily transferred full ownership of Calloway's Woodworks to you 18 months ago. Your father is saying that signature is not his. One of you is lying to this proceeding." Carol smoothed her blazer. She'd worn the navy one today, the expensive one I'd bought her 3 Christmases ago. My father has been under significant stress since his stroke. His memory isn't what it used to be. The words landed like a slap. I'd had a mild stroke 8 months ago. Left side weakness, some speech slowdown for about 3 weeks. My neurologist had cleared me completely by month 2. I had documentation. Carol apparently had documentation of her own, just not the authentic kind. "Your Honor," I said, then caught myself. Old habit from the one time I'd been called for jury duty. "Ma'am, I had a stroke in March. By May, I was cleared by Dr. Henson at Vanderbilt Medical. I have the records here." I slid the folder across to her. "I also have the original partnership agreement, signed by both Carol and myself in 2019, which clearly states that full ownership transfer requires notarization and witness signatures. This document has neither." The mediator studied both papers side by side for a long moment. Carol's husband, Derek, shifted in his seat. He was a big man, Derek. Loud at dinner tables, quiet in rooms where he was outmatched. "Mrs. Sutton," the mediator said slowly, "the notary stamp on this document is registered to a Harold Finch in Davidson County. We contacted Mr. Finch's office this morning. He has no record of notarizing any document involving Calloway's Woodworks. Ever." The silence in that room had weight to it. Carol's lawyer leaned over and whispered something. Carol shook her head once, sharp. Then she looked at me for the first time all morning, and what I saw in her face wasn't guilt. It was calculation. She was still looking for an angle. That told me everything I needed to know about who my daughter had become. "This mediation is concluded," the mediator said. "Mr. Calloway retains full legal ownership of Calloway's Woodworks. I'm referring this matter to the Davidson County DA's office for review of the submitted document. Mrs. Sutton, I strongly advise you to consult with your attorney before leaving this building. My lawyer, a compact woman named Rosalind Park, who I'd been referred to by my oldest friend, squeezed my arm once under the table. Professional. Restrained. But I saw the corner of her mouth. Across the table, Derek was on his feet already, red-faced, saying something to Carol in a low, furious voice. Their lawyer was gathering papers with the hurried energy of a man who wanted to be somewhere else. Carol stood. She buttoned her blazer. She looked at me one more time. "You're going to regret this, Dad." She said it quietly, almost gently. Then she walked out. I sat there for a moment after they left, listening to the air conditioning hum, thinking about the workshop I'd built from nothing 40 years ago, and the daughter I thought I'd raised right, and how those two things had somehow ended up in the same room today on opposite sides of a table. Rosalind drove me back to the shop. "They'll likely hear from the DA within 2 to 3 weeks, she said, keeping her eyes on the road. Submitting a falsified document in a legal proceeding is a serious matter. Combined with the unauthorized use of the notary stamp, Carol and Derek are looking at potential forgery charges. "She's my daughter," I said, not defending her. Just saying it out loud, the way you repeat something that doesn't quite make sense yet. "I know." Rosalind was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to happen, Walter?" I looked out the window at the Nashville skyline, brown and gold in October. 43 years I'd lived in this city. I'd built the workshop here, raised Carol here, buried my wife Patricia here 6 years ago. I thought I was building something that would last. "I want her to understand what she did," I said. "I don't know yet if I want her to be punished for it." Rosalind nodded. "We have time to make that call. Right now, let the process move." My shop manager, a man named Gerald, who'd been with me for 19 years, was waiting when I pulled into the parking lot. He took one look at my face and handed me a coffee without saying anything. That was Gerald. Best employee I'd ever had. I'd thought for years that Carol would keep him on. That was before. I should go back and explain how we got here. Because none of this started with the mediation, and none of it started with the stroke. It started the way a lot of things start. Slowly, then, all at once, Patricia died in the fall of 2018. Pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the end. Fast and terrible. Carol was devastated. We both were. In the grief of those first months, I made decisions I thought were generous. Decisions that felt, at the time, like the right thing to do for my only child. Carol and Derek had been struggling financially. Derek worked in sales and had a talent for spending just slightly more than he earned. Carol had quit her marketing job when their son, my grandson Benji, was born. They were renting a house in Brentwood, stretched thin, and I could see the stress on my daughter's face every time she visited. So I started helping. It began small. I covered Benji's preschool tuition, $1,100 a month. Then Carol mentioned the transmission on their car had gone. I bought them a replacement vehicle, a used Tahoe, $22,000. When their lease ended and they couldn't qualify for a mortgage without a bigger down payment, I gave them $60,000 to make it happen. Then, because the mortgage still stretched them, I started a monthly transfer. $4,500 into Carol's account every first of the month, like clockwork. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Patricia would have wanted this. I told myself a lot of things. The business I'd built, Callaway's Woodworks, had been successful for decades. Custom furniture, restoration work, commercial contracts with restaurants and hotels across Tennessee. It wasn't glamorous money, but it was real money, built board by board over 40 years. I had enough to be generous and not feel it, and I didn't feel it. Not until March. I was in the workshop, alone, checking the finish on a dining table we were delivering the next morning. It was about 7 p.m. The feeling started in my left hand, a strange heaviness, and then my vision went sideways and I sat down hard on the concrete floor and couldn't get up. Gerald found me 40 minutes later when he came back for a forgotten jacket. He called 911. I was in the hospital by 8. The stroke was classified as mild. That word does a lot of work. Mild. What it meant in practice was that I spent 11 days in the hospital, came home with a walker I needed for 3 weeks, dealt with speech that tangled itself for a month, and lived alone in a house that suddenly felt very large and very quiet. Carol came to the hospital once. The day after I was admitted, she stayed for 2 hours, asked the doctors their questions, told me Derek sent his love, and said she'd be back on the weekend. She didn't come on the weekend. I called her on Sunday evening, voice still a little slow. She answered on the 4th ring. I could hear noise in the background. Music, people talking, the clink of glasses. Dad, hey, sorry, we're at the Hendersons. What's up? What's up? I'd had a stroke 4 days ago. I just wanted to hear your voice, I said. Oh, a pause. Okay. Are you doing okay? Do you need the nurses to get you something? I was at home by then. I'd been discharged that morning. Gerald had driven me, helped me get settled, stocked the refrigerator. My daughter didn't know I'd been discharged because she hadn't called to ask. I'm fine, I said. Go back to your party. I lay in my bed that night, left side still heavy, and I thought about Patricia. Patricia would have been there. Patricia would have slept in the hospital chair. Patricia would have known when I was discharged without having to be told. But Patricia was gone, and my daughter was at the Hendersons. The calls didn't come after that. Not that week, not the next. I got occasional texts. How are you feeling? Benji drew you a picture. I'll mail it. Derek's work trip got extended, but we'll try to visit soon. Rosalind had told me before all this, when I'd first called her about some estate planning, to document everything. She meant it in a legal sense, but I'd started keeping notes anyway. Dates. What was said. What wasn't. It was 6 weeks after the stroke, still using a cane, still doing daily speech therapy exercises, that I decided to drive past the workshop. I hadn't been back. Gerald had been managing everything, sending me daily updates, keeping the contracts moving. I told him to hold things together until I was cleared to return. What I didn't know was that Carol had been there. Gerald told me that evening, voice careful. Miss, Carol came in twice last week, Mr. Callaway, with Derek. They were looking at the books. I showed them what I could, but I told them you'd have to authorize anything further. What were they looking for? A pause. She said she was going to be taking over management while you recovered. She said you'd asked her to. I had not asked her to. I called Carol that night. She answered more quickly this time. Dad, good, I was going to call you. We need to talk about the shop. I agreed. Start by telling me why you told Gerald I'd asked you to take over management. A beat. Because you need help right now. You can't run that place from your couch. I've been running it from my couch for 6 weeks, through Gerald, and it's running fine. Gerald's an employee, Dad. The business needs family involvement. Derek has management experience. Derek sold mid-range office furniture. His management experience was a generous description of what he actually did, but what I focused on was the word family. My daughter had not come to see me in 6 weeks, and now she wanted to talk about family. Carol, I said, why weren't you here? Silence. I had a stroke. I came home from the hospital alone. I've been here 6 weeks. Why weren't you here? Dad, that's not fair. We have Benji, and Derek's schedule has been... I gave you $4,500 last month, I said. The month before that, I bought your house. I bought your car. I paid for 3 years of preschool. And when I came home from the hospital, Gerald stocked my refrigerator. More silence. When Carol spoke again, her voice had shifted. Cooler. You're upset. That's understandable, given everything you've been through. We can talk about this when you're feeling better. That phrase. When you're feeling better. As if what I was feeling was a symptom rather than a conclusion. I'm feeling fine, I said, and I want you to stay out of the shop until I return. She stayed out of the shop. But 2 months later, Rosalind called me with something that changed everything. A law firm she knew had been contacted by someone requesting information on transferring sole ownership of a small business in Nashville. The firm had passed on the inquiry, but the contact name had been Carol Sutton, and the business was Callaway's Woodworks, and Rosalind thought I should know. I sat with that information for 3 days. Then I called my accountant, a woman named Helen who'd done my books for 12 years. I asked her to audit every account connected to the business over the past 8 months. Then I called Gerald and asked him to make a full inventory of the equipment, the active contracts, and any documents that had been moved or copied. What came back was worse than I'd expected. Not dramatic theft, nothing so obvious. But there were expense reports filed in Carol's name against the business account. Small things. A catering order. A hotel booking. Supplies that didn't match any active project. $6,000 in total across 14 transactions. Each one small enough not to trigger an automatic flag. 14 transactions. Each one a decision. Each one a choice. I told Rosalind everything. She told me we needed to move quickly, document everything, and say nothing to Carol yet. I went back to the workshop the following Monday. First time back since the stroke. Gerald was there when I arrived, and I saw something shift in his face when I walked through the door. Something that might have been relief. I spent that week going through everything myself. By Friday, I had a clear picture. The next morning, I called Carol. I'd like to have lunch, I said. Just us. There's a place on Hillsborough I've been meaning to try. She seemed surprised. She agreed. She even sounded warm, like maybe she'd expected things to continue in the direction of that last phone call and was glad they hadn't. Over sandwiches, I told her I'd been reviewing the business finances. I watched her face, very carefully. Oh, right, she said. I was going to explain some of those. There were some things we needed for the Brentwood project. There is no Brentwood project, I said. There hasn't been a Brentwood project since February. Her jaw tightened. Carol, I also spoke with an attorney. I know about the ownership inquiry. She set down her fork. I am not angry, I said. It wasn't entirely true, but it was the frame I needed. I am telling you that I know. And I'm telling you that I am going back to work next week, full time. And the financial transfers to your account are going to stop. Stop. She repeated it like she hadn't heard me correctly. The $4,500 a month. I'm ending it. You're 41 years old. Derek is employed. Benji is in school. You don't need my support to survive. Dad, you can't just... I can. I already have. I called the bank this morning. The restaurant was quiet around us. Lunch crowd, soft music, clinking forks. Carol stared at me. I watched the calculation again, the same thing I'd see later in the mediation room. This is because I didn't come to the hospital enough, she said. You're punishing me. I'm not punishing you. I'm stopping. There's a difference. She didn't see the difference. She left before dessert. The weeks after that moved in the way that consequences move, gathering, inevitable. Carol stopped calling. Derek sent one text, oddly formal, saying they hoped we could resolve things as a family. I didn't respond. Benji sent a drawing in the mail, a blue dog with the word Grand PA in careful 6-year-old letters along the bottom. I put it on the refrigerator. Through Helen, I learned that Carol and Derek had taken out a personal loan 3 weeks after I ended the transfers. Then another one. Then 3 credit cards in quick succession. They'd built their life on a foundation that was actually just my floor. When I moved, they had nothing underneath. It was Helen who first flagged the business account irregularities that were new, things that hadn't shown up in my initial audit. Someone had tried to initiate an automatic transfer from the business account to an external account I didn't recognize. It had been blocked by the bank's fraud detection, but only just. I called Rosalind. Rosalind made calls. Within a week, we had bank records, login timestamps, and a very clear picture of who had initiated the transfer from a tablet registered to Derek Sutton. That was when Rosalind suggested we move the mediation process forward. Carol arrived at that mediation believing she had leverage. The falsified document, she must have thought, was clean enough. She hadn't counted on the notary, or on Rosalind, or on the fact that I was not actually a confused old man whose memory was going. I was a 6'4" man who had built a business from nothing and knew exactly where every piece of paper in it lived. The days after the mediation were quiet. I worked. Gerald ran the floor. The Brentwood dining table we'd finished got delivered, and the client sent a note saying it was perfect. Ordinary life, humming along, while somewhere on the other side of Nashville, Carol and Derek sat with a referral to the district attorney and a stack of debts they had no idea how to manage. My grandson called me on a Thursday. He was 6, so the conversation was mostly about a cartoon he liked and a loose tooth. But at the end he said, very seriously, "Mom's been crying a lot, Grandpa." "I know, buddy. Is she okay?" "She will be. How's the tooth?" "Wiggly." "Grandpa, are you still mad at Mom?" I looked out my kitchen window at the backyard. Patricia's garden, the one she'd kept for 20 years, had gone half wild since she died. I'd been meaning to tend it. I kept meaning to. "I'm not mad," I said, mostly meaning it. "I'm just giving her time to think." 2 weeks later, Rosalind called. "The DA's office has reviewed the file. They're not moving forward with criminal charges, but they've issued a formal warning. Carol and Derek both had to appear and sign documentation acknowledging the falsified submission. It'll be on record." "Okay." "Also, their loan servicer has flagged their primary loan for default. They're 60 days behind." I thought about the house I hadn't bought for them, the car payments I hadn't made this year, the $4,500 that hadn't appeared in Carol's account for 5 months now. "Is Benji okay?" I asked. "He's with Carol." "As far as I know, yes. That's what matters." It was Gerald who told me the next thing, indirectly. He mentioned that his cousin worked at a property management company and had processed a rental application recently for a couple named Sutton. Small 2-bedroom in Antioch, the affordable side of Nashville. They'd had to list my business address as a reference because they had almost no other verifiable assets. The house was gone. The Tahoe had been sold months before, I later found out, replaced by a used Civic. The designer furniture in the living room I'd seen on Carol's Instagram, gone to a consignment shop. The weekend trips, the dinners, the whole careful construction of a life that looked like theirs dismantled, piece by piece. Derek, from what I gathered through Rosalind's contacts, had finally been let go from his position. Something about misrepresenting his sales figures. He'd found new work, but at a lower salary, and the commissions he'd counted on weren't there. Carol had picked up part-time work at a nonprofit doing marketing, entry-level, effectively. She had a master's degree and 15 years of professional experience, and she was starting over at 41 because the life she'd constructed on my money had been built without any load-bearing walls of her own. I didn't feel triumph about this. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was something closer to grief. Grief for the daughter I'd expected. For the relationship we should have had. For the way Patricia's death had somehow broken something in Carol that I hadn't seen clearly enough, hadn't addressed firmly enough, had instead tried to paper over with money. Benji's birthday was in December. He turned 7. I sent a card with a check for his savings account. The account I'd opened for him 2 years ago, directly in his name. I didn't send anything through Carol. She called me the day after his birthday. First time in almost 4 months. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought about Benji and his wiggly tooth and his blue dog drawing on my refrigerator, and I picked up. Dad. Her voice was different. The coolness was gone. What was there instead was something raw, something that sounded like someone who hadn't slept. Can we meet? Please. Just you and me. We met at a diner near my shop. Neutral ground, public, no lawyers. She was there when I arrived. She looked like she'd lost 15 pounds. The navy blazer was nowhere in sight. She was wearing a fleece I remembered from years ago, practical and old. I sat down. I waited. I don't know where to start, she said. Start wherever you need to. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. Derek and I are separated. He moved out last month. He says it's temporary, but I don't think it is. She paused. I think I knew, somewhere, that the way we were living wasn't real, but it was easy to not look at it directly. And when you cut the transfers, I panicked, and Derek panicked, and we made decisions that were, she stopped, swallowed. I told myself we were just protecting the business, protecting your assets while you were recovering. I told myself that for a long time. The document, I said. She flinched. Was Derek's idea. I agreed to it. I'm not going to pretend I didn't know what it was. I knew. She met my eyes for the first time. They were red. She hadn't been sleeping. I knew it was wrong, and I thought you were. I told myself you might not even notice, that you were older, that the stroke had... My mind is fine, Carol. I know that now. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. I knew it then, too. I just didn't want to know it. I looked at my daughter, 41 years old, sitting in a diner booth in an old fleece, looking more honest than I'd seen her look in years. Honesty born of having nothing left to protect. It wasn't the kind of honesty I'd have chosen for her, but it was real. Your mother would be devastated, I said quietly. Carol pressed her lips together, nodded. Not because of the money, not because of any of this legal business, because she raised you to show up. When things get hard, you show up. That's the only thing she ever required of us. And you didn't show up, I know. When I was in that hospital, I stopped. Steadied myself. I needed my daughter. That's all. I didn't need management consultation or business strategy. I needed someone who would sit in the chair next to the bed and be there. And you weren't. Carol was crying now, quietly. Not performing it. Just sitting with it. I'm not asking for the money back, I said. I'm not changing what's going to happen with Rosalind and the legal end of things. That process has to run its course. What I'm asking you is whether you understand what actually happened here, not the money, not the document, the thing underneath all of it. I put comfort over you, she said. It came out rough. I let Derek set the priority, and I didn't push back because it was easier. Because we had the transfers and the house, and I never had to reckon with the fact that I'd stopped doing the hard things. And then when you actually needed me, I didn't have the muscle anymore. It let it go soft. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years, maybe in a decade. I have $23,000 in debt, she said, between the loans and the credit cards. The apartment is manageable. The job is it's okay. I'm starting over. She laughed, one short sound. At 41, you have time. Do I have... She stopped. Started again more carefully. Do I have a father? I looked out the window at the Nashville street. November now, leaves mostly gone. Sky, the particular gray of southern winters. Patricia had loved this city in November. Said it was honest. No pretense left on the trees. You have a father, I said. But I'm not the same father I was before March. I'm not going to be the one who smooths things over with money when they get hard. I'm not going to be the source of funding for a life you should be building yourself. That man made some mistakes. I own them. But he's gone. Carol nodded. She understood, I thought. Or she was beginning to. Benji needs his grandfather, she said. Benji has his grandfather. That hasn't changed. I paused. Bring him by the shop sometime. He's never seen where I work. Where I've worked his whole life. Something shifted in Carol's face at that. A door, opening a crack. 3 weeks later, she brought him on a Saturday morning. Benji was 7, and fearless, and had approximately 9,000 questions about every piece of equipment in the workshop. I answered all of them. We were there for 3 hours. Gerald gave him a small scrap of walnut to take home. Carol stood back and watched. and I could see her trying to hold herself very still, the way you do when something good is happening that you're afraid to disturb. When they were leaving, Benji hugged me in the way kids that age hug, with their whole body, no reservation. Carol hugged me too, careful, like she wasn't sure she'd earned it. I let her. After they drove away, I walked back through the shop to the corner where I'd been restoring an old roll-top desk for the past 2 months. It had come in damaged, water-stained and warped, one of the drawers completely jammed. The owner had said to do whatever I thought was best. I'd stripped it back to bare wood, found the frame underneath was solid. The damage was all surface, all weather. The bones were good. I sat down at my workbench, picked up my finishing cloth, and got back to work. Rosalind had asked me, months ago, what I wanted to happen. I hadn't fully known then. I knew better now. I didn't want to destroy my daughter. I didn't want to spend what years I had left in a cold silence. What I wanted was what I'd always wanted. What Patricia had wanted when she built that garden out back and tended it every single season without fail. You put in the work. You don't skip the hard months. You show up. Carol was learning that the hard way, the only way it actually sticks. The desk was coming along. Another few sessions and the surface would be smooth, the drawer would move clean, the whole thing would look like something worth keeping. I'd learned this year that you can't build anything real on a foundation that belongs to someone else. Not a business, not a marriage, not a life. Sooner or later, you have to find your own footing. And if you haven't built those muscles, that moment is brutal. Carol had hit that moment. She was finding her footing. So was I. And the shop was open, the contracts were good, Gerald had just hired a new apprentice, and on my refrigerator there was a drawing of a blue dog with Grand P, written in 6-year-old letters at the bottom. Some things get rebuilt better than they were before. Some things, if you do the work right, can last. If this story moved you, please share it and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear the next story, click the box on the right.